Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Garza, and I'm the president and CEO of Battelle for Kids, a national not-for-profit out of Columbus, Ohio. We're delighted to be with you today, and on behalf of my organization and our wonderful partners and friends at AASA and the Successful Practices Network, represented by, of course, Dr. Bill Daggett, we want to thank Ed Week for this opportunity today. I also want to thank you all for joining us. I know that this is an extraordinarily busy time of year and an extraordinarily challenging time to be leading school systems and supporting children. And we really appreciate all that you do on behalf of children across the United States. It's important work that you're doing, really important work. We look forward to learning with you all today. We have 1 hour together, and in that hour, you'll have the opportunity to hear from, I think, one of the preeminent national thought leaders, Linda Darling-Hammond. And then we have two outstanding superintendents whose school districts have been selected as AASA's Learning 2025 Lighthouse Districts. And we'll get to learn about their journey in this work. If you have questions for anyone speaking today, if you'll put those questions in the Q&A, you'll see a little tab at the bottom. Put those in Q&A. We might not get to very many questions today because we have a lot of wonderful things to talk about. But if you put that in there, we'll do our very, very best to get those answers back to you via email. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to another person who needs no introduction, my wonderful friend and colleague from the Successful Practices Network, Dr. Bill Daggett. And he'll provide us with a little background on Learning 2025, just to set the stage or provide some context for our conversations today. Bill.
Thanks, Karen. And Karen, I want to join you in thanking everyone for being with us, the panelists, Linda Darling-Hammond, and especially everybody joining us on the webinar. You know, if we go back to August 2020, and while you think back for a moment to that period of time, we were a few months into the pandemic. And many leaders throughout the country began to say, you know, maybe it's a time for us to be able to make some of the changes in and around American education we know we've needed to make for some time. And so, led by AASA, a national commission was created. It's called AASA Learning National Commission 2025. And they brought together 27 of our nation's leaders, 12 of the nation's most well-known, respected school superintendents, leaders from the technology community, from the Ed Foundation community, from thought leaders throughout the country. I had the privilege to co-chair that commission with Dr. Dan Domenech. And we began to meet in December and met through April of 2021. We met every other week. And they came up with a series of very bold recommendations. But what the commission concluded at the end was, you know, this was going to be like every other commission report. It's going to sit on the shelf unless we drive it into school districts and we find school districts across this country that are really committed to one or more of the bold recommendations. And so they created something called the Learning 2025 National Demonstration Network. And 120 school districts, from small, tiny districts to large urban to suburban districts across the country, joined. And they worked hard for a year. And then this past year, we said, you know, Battelle for Kids and their networks and all the groups they're working with, we want to bring them together with us. And so Karen's group joined forces with our group to try to share the successful practices across the nation. And now we're up to, between the two groups, 280 districts. As we did that, some of the districts obviously rose to the top. We're really already on the cutting edge. Baldwin Unified School District in Long Island, New York was one of them, Naperville in Illinois was another. And we're really pleased that they'll be joining us today, those two superintendents, to share their extraordinary success stories and also the journey they've taken to get there. But one of the key things was we wanted to be guided by research. And so we said, make sure that any initiatives that we talk about are grounded in good educational research. And we've leaned on a lot of people, one of them, Linda Darling-Hammond. So Karen, I'm going to turn back to you to ask you to introduce Linda, who is the preeminent thought leader in this field for America. Karen, back to you.
Karen, I believe you're on mute.
So sorry, everyone. Gives me great pleasure to introduce to you someone that's really special to so many of us, a person that we've followed and really read her research and really thought deeply about her counsel and how we lead this important work throughout the nation. Linda Darling-Hammond is the Charles Ducommun Professor of Education Emeritus at Stanford University, and she's the founding president of the Learning Policy Institute. She is the author of many books and articles, including her most recent book that she co-authored with her daughter, Kia, The Civil Rights Road to Deeper Learning, 5 Essentials for Equity. And I will tell you, I've read it. I love it. I cannot recommend it enough. Linda, you're always so generous with your time. Thank you for being such a powerful leader in this work and continuing to push the nation to think differently about education. So Linda is going to talk with us about the science of learning. Thank you, Linda, for being with us today.
Thank you so much. And it's really my honor to be with the leaders of our school systems for whom I have so much respect and admiration, especially right now in the context that we're in. So thank you for all that you've been doing, and Bill and all of the folks at AASA. I'm going to say just a little bit about the research underpinnings that Bill mentioned, and I want to hear the superintendents and what they're doing. So I will try to make this very rapid, and we'll share the slides if anybody wants them. And let's see if we can figure out how to make them move. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about design principles for schools that grounded in the science of learning and development, because I think that's what Learning 2025 actually does. It really helps us get a roadmap for what the science has been telling us for some time. We've learned a lot in this country about how people learn. How People Learn was the name of a book that the National Academy put out in 2000. And How People Learn 2 came out about a decade later, actually almost 2 decades later, really adding the idea that not only do we know something about the processing that the brain does and how we learn, often through inquiry and directed instruction that are combined together in the right way, but also motivation matters, culture matters. We all learn from our cultural contexts, and we need to think about those things as well. What we know from the science is that, for one thing, the brain is always changing and growing. It's malleable, even at my age. My brain is continuing to wire in ways that make me able to do different and more things, so that children are not born and identified by their brain capacity at birth. They are always growing their brains based on the relationships and the experiences that we provide for them in schools. That those things really matter greatly, and how we structure those relationships and experiences. Variation is the norm. There is no such thing as average. Average is that middle number on the curve, but the disparities and differences among us, no two brains are alike. And so the sort of standardized factory model doesn't quite capture what we need to do for kids. Learning is social, emotional, and academic. Whatever we feel about the environment we're in, about ourselves as learners, translates into how much we can learn. When we are stressed, when we feel stigmatized, if we've experienced trauma, our brains actually become confused and clouded and allow us to learn less. Deep learning is a product of inquiry that we then apply. And that is true of human existence. Everything we've invented as human beings came from inquiry. And trauma, of course, affects learning. You know this so well. But strong positive relationships that are long-standing are the best antidote to trauma. So we have to design our schools for those relationships. And these pieces of the science actually stand in contrast to a lot of the assumptions that people had when the factory model schools were invented in the early 1900s. There was a thought eugenicists were very active in the design of our school system. For selecting, sorting, and tracking, there's the thought that kids determine what you become and figure that out at birth and put kids in their tracks and conveyor belts.
Friday.
I'm hearing somebody who needs to maybe go on mute.
Shirt only, no pajamas. We're not talking any kind of bottom PJs.
Okay. Someone in the
Remember, we are fast.
should mute their line if possible.
Bill, mute your line.
Remember, there are no scholars in the building unattended at the end of the day. If you
I
are
think
not,
it's actually somebody who's in a school office. I'm going to carry forward and hope that we can just, oh, good, that worked. The other thing that we have learned is that kids don't learn in standardized ways, that rewards and punishments are actually problematic for the process of learning, and that average does not stand for the individual. One of the things I want to point out about what we have learned is that potential is visible in environments designed to reveal it. So that is the task for us in designing learning environments, is to be able to see what kids bring, their assets, their potential, and then build on that. And talent is, in fact, when we do that, plentiful and not on a single bell curve. So AASA's Learning 2025 is a wonderful framework for the work that you do in schools, student-centered, equity-focused, future-driven education based on the holistic redesign of the public school system, a very ambitious goal with 2025 as the goal date, and the kinds of schools that it envisions and seeks to develop move from the individual student working sort of in their structured workbook by themselves at their desks to schools that are really able to take advantage of collaboration, inquiry, and supports from teachers on the side. This time that we're in, that we've experienced the pandemic, the public health crisis, economic crisis, the climate crisis, civil rights crisis, is the kind of time that also often gives birth to systemic changes in human history. So how do we use this time that has been so traumatic to support systemic change? On the LPI website, you'll find something called Restarting and Reinventing School, and it has lots of examples across areas that dovetail with Learning 2025 about what the elements are of a new system that will provide the kinds of relationships, 21st century skills, supports, and equitable opportunities that our schools were not designed to provide when they were first founded in that design 100 years ago. One piece of that is that schools need to be places that are less productive of cortisol, the hormone that floods the brain and creates the fight or flight syndrome and makes it very hard to support learning. The stressors, kids experience them outside of school and may bring them in with them, but they may also experience them in school. And take a moment and think about all of the things that kids might experience in a school environment that are stressful, that challenge their sense of self, that challenge their ability to engage with the content. We need school environments that are productive of oxytocin. I think of that as the hugging hormone, whether it's virtual or physical. The ways in which people, in fact, flood the brain with the hormone that actually enhances brain architecture, makes the brain better wired, and also opens up attention and focus for learning. So that's just an image to keep in mind as you're thinking about how schools need to change so that kids feel a sense of belonging, which is very powerful for attaching students to school, to each other, to the adults in it, where they feel academically accepted, where they feel socially accepted, where they feel respected academically, and where they feel respected socially. And these are some of the elements that are sort of necessary for the inclusion and belonging that support high quality learning. Kids learn most under conditions of low threat and high supports. We drew out a lot of the implications for schools in a document, which really dovetails almost perfectly with Learning 2025, called the Design Principles for Schools, which identify 5 big areas for work in redesign. One of those is having positive developmental relationships. Another is creating environments full of belonging and purpose. Another is having the kind of inquiry-oriented instruction-rich learning experiences that support engagement in learning. Those go hand in hand with explicit instruction around social and emotional skills, mindsets, and habits, including a growth mindset. And finally, the integrated student supports that remove obstacles to learning through anything from tutoring and small group instruction that is added on to the kinds of physical and mental health supports, social service supports that kids need to remove obstacles to learning. Too often in our schools, you have to qualify for those services in ways that are torturous and take a long time to get kids connected to what they need. And we need to figure out how to create the school structures that support those attachments and relationships, everything from advisory systems, small learning communities, and classroom practices that are supportive, those rich learning experiences that build on prior knowledge and connect to cultural contexts. All of us have cultural contexts for our learning that allow us to make the connections that we can build on for the next part of our learning, to create identity safety at the core of the school so that everyone feels like they belong, that they are seen, that they are appreciated, that they are supported, and creating the restorative practices that allow that to be true and eliminate stigma and bullying, and then the structures that provide those extended supports in this whole child approach that I think all of us are really trying to pursue in this new era and is the foundation for Learning 2025 and for the schools of the future. So I'm going to stop there and hand the ball back so that we can hear from the wonderful folks who are doing the work in their school systems.
Thank you, Linda. This is Karen again. Bill, my apologies. Bill has lost connectivity, so he may be able to join us here in just a moment, but right now he's kind of fallen off. Linda, I love what you were saying about the current design of education. I've heard you and your colleague Pam Cantor often talk about, the traditional model of education was not informed, was designed without understanding of how human beings best learn, and particularly how children best learn. What do you think is one of the most common misconceptions around how we respond to students, particularly when they're struggling, and the current model of education and what we know now about the science of learning?
I think that, when I was coming into teaching, I was a high school teacher many years ago. There were these aphorisms like "Don't smile until Christmas." Before that, there was "Spare the rod, spoil the child." There's this idea that somehow if you're not tough and if you're not, sort of setting up the expectation of punishment, that you will somehow lose control and then students will, be running around crazy. But in fact, it turns out that even B.F. Skinner, who created the whole idea of rewards and punishments, learned and agreed by the time he had gone through much of his career that punishment doesn't work. That in fact, what allows people to learn and to grow and to behave and to connect is around creating attachment. It's around creating empathy. And when that happens, if you say to a child who looks like they are maybe not attending or, flaring, we have the temper flaring or something. If you say, "What's going on? Are you okay? What's happening with you?" Rather than "Get out of here, go to the office," or whatever the other kind of response might be, you will get insights and connections that allow growth, learning, and attachment in ways that are much more productive of later behavior and of learning than, the old, "Get out of my face, you're not behaving." I think there's also been an assumption that kids, know how to behave or know how to do what school is expecting of them, and that they don't have a social and emotional life. But if you think of all the things that are going on with kids, on the playground, on the way to school, maybe at home. I started a school with colleagues in a community that was known as the murder capital of the United States. There's so many drive-by shootings in the 1990s, and we started the school during that era in the early 2000s. And kids would come with a lot of trauma. You have to have a space and a place to attach them. Advisory was that place for us in a high school where they could be nourished and listened to and supported. And that school took what was a 2/3 dropout rate for the students in that community and graduated 90% of them and sent 90% of them to college because of the social and emotional underpinnings that were put in place for those young people.
Well, it's about human development, isn't it?
It is.
And so, both, and I think some of these changes that you're talking about not only are more beneficial for the children in the system, but also for what I think our educators are wanting. Would you kind of speak to that around this challenge of how do we inspire more people to be part of this profession? And do you see a connection between this kind of reimagining of education in this work?
People come into teaching and into all kinds of educational roles because they want to make a difference, because they want to do well by children. If you're put in an environment that does not allow you to be effective, it's very frustrating. And we lose a lot of people. And teachers will say, I left because I couldn't be successful. They look for colleagueship. They look for opportunities to have good relationships with kids and parents. All those things really matter. I am a big advocate for redesigning the high school, having been a high school teacher. You cannot care effectively for 150 or 180 kids a day, all by yourself, not in a team, isolated in an egg crate classroom. That structure is problematic, and you will lose a lot of kids and you'll lose a lot of teachers who can't make the connections. But in schools where you've got small learning communities, you've got teaching teams who share a group of students, where you've got an advisory system where my 15 or 20 kids are the ones that I relate to the parents and serve as an advocate for, and I can always go to someone else's advisor and get them to help. When you have that kind of connected environment, people want to be there. Kids want to be there. Teachers want to be there. Learning flourishes, but we have to redesign what we inherited.
Well, Linda, I'm hoping you'll be able to, thank you so much for for being with us today, but for agreeing to stay on. I'd love for you maybe later to comment. We're going to hear now from a couple of superintendents, but before I do that, I just want to plug your book. And we didn't even talk about this. You didn't even know I was going to do it. But, it sometimes seems daunting to start this work. I think most people recognize we have to, transform education. But I was just going to say, in this book, there's some really hopeful stories of real school districts and real approaches and schools that have really taken this on. So I would encourage anyone that's interested in how do you do this, some great examples in this book. So hang on, and I may come back to you here in just a little bit, Linda, but thank you so much for all you do for advancing the field of education and support of children. Now we're going to go to two wonderful superintendents. I think that Bill Daggett still has not been able to join with us yet. So we have Dan Bridges, who's superintendent in Naperville Community School District in Illinois, and Sherry Cammey, who's AASA president and also superintendent in Baldwin Union Free School District. We are going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their district, and we'll get started with that, and then we'll have some questions for them to share about their story and their journey in this work. So let's get started with you, Dan. Would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Linda, for getting us started and all of the thoughts you had to share. My name is Dan Bridges. This is my 11th year as the superintendent in Naperville, Illinois, Naperville Community Unit School District 203. Naperville, Illinois is the fourth largest city in the state of Illinois, about 145,000 residents. We actually educate students in Naperville in partnership with another school district, Indian Prairie 204, and really proud of the work that we've been doing. In Illinois, there are about 850 school districts. Naperville 203 is the 9th largest of the school districts in the state of Illinois. We have 23 schools serving about 16,700 students. And, I think as we look back over the past couple of decades, just like so many districts across our country, we're a district that has changed in terms of the students and the families that we're serving. In the year 2000, we were about an 88% white student population. Today, we're about 60%. At that same time, in the year 2000, about 1% of our kids were eligible for a free reduced lunch day. That number is about 17%. So not, the most diverse school district compared to a lot of, districts across the country, but the change that we've experienced over the past couple of decades has been pretty significant. And so for us as a school district, we've been really proud of how we've continued to work differently to support our kids and our families based on the needs that they bring to us. Looking forward to sharing a little bit more about the things that we've done and the successes we've had and also the challenges that we've faced. So thanks again for inviting me to be here today.
Thank you, Dan. And Sherry?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Linda, for all of the work you've been doing. I'm sort of stuck on where Linda ended, which is we really need to think about our high schools. And I hope to share a little bit about what we've been doing there, because I couldn't agree more. I am the proud superintendent of the Baldwin Union Free School District on Long Island in New York. And just so everybody knows, yes, we do have unions. It is a funding thing in New York State. We are not union free, nor do we want to be. My school district is on Long Island, about 20 miles outside of Manhattan. So there is pretty close to us, very, very rich in terms of the arts and businesses and a real opportunity to tap into the world outside of schools. We are, as very similar to Dan, a school district that has seen demographic changes, but more than 20 years ago. Our community, our school community is about 50% Black, about 34% Hispanic, 11% white, about 5% Asian, mixed race, and other. I am very proud that our high school has seen a graduation rate of 97 or 98% every year for the last 5 years. And our students, about 94%, that number changes year to year, but about 94% go on to higher education of one sort or another. New York has about 741 school districts. They range in size from a one-room schoolhouse, believe it or not, to the New York City Public Schools, which is the largest school system in the country. And I think every single school district has their own personality. Our school system really defined itself by not only being a very diverse community, but using that diversity to make sure that all our kids are successful in one way or the other. And I know that we'll have more time to talk about that after.
Thank you, Sherry. We appreciate so much you both being with us today. And first of all, I want to say congratulations to you both. I know you've been leading this really important work in your district, and it's really nice to have the honorable distinction of being a lighthouse district. And we appreciate kind of part of that is being willing to share your journey in this work so that we can inspire others to engage as well. So I want to hear about first your success story. And I want to tell the audience, I wish we had hours to spend with these two superintendents, because I'm sure their story is long and complex and so interesting, but we have a very short amount of time. But just the high points of your success journey. Sherry, why don't we start with you, and then we'll follow with Dan.
Sure, thank you. So I would say, in a nutshell, our success is really all about our students. We have really zoned in and focused on our students and the needs of our students in 2022, 2023. We hear back from our graduates, and we hear from them about the successes that they've had. In fact, one of our graduates is soon to be on the moon. Jasmine Mogbelli is an astronaut and really speaks to her elementary experience as the thing that made the difference for her. if you go back, because our story, I think, really goes back to the days of No Child Left Behind. This is my 9th year as superintendent, and one of the promises that I made to our teachers and our school community is that we were going to bring joy back into learning, that it was not about testing and that grind of testing. It was about learning. And it was about creating learning opportunities for the young people in our school system. And so I think everything that we do is based on joy and relevance and meaning for our young people. And how do we support them? Because ultimately our job is really about their future, right? And so we have done a lot of work to create small successes and build on those small successes. We didn't name the successes, we just did the work. And then we shared that work, and people all of a sudden became really excited about the things that we were doing. And so to give you a couple of small examples, we have a convening of thought leaders called Baldwin 2035. It is all about thinking what Baldwin will look like in the year 2035 and then creating those milestones along the way to get there, knowing full well that when we get to 2035, that goalpost moves, right? Because we're not going to sit still. One of the things that really drives it is if you think about the Committee of 10, 1892. Our high schools are designed around the Committee of 10, 1892. I dare you to Google any picture from 1892. It doesn't look like that anymore. And so at our high school, for example, we have created an academy program that is open to any single student that wants to be part of it. It is not exclusive, and it is not a school within a school. But we have created academies around the interests of our students and the economy around which we live, right? So Long Island and the area around Long Island. And so we have a medical and health science academy, a new media academy, a long government academy, an education academy. We all know there's a shortage of educators, shortage of diversity in that. And so an education academy, STEM and engineering, fine and performing arts. I saw a question in the Q&A, what about fine and performing arts? And global business. And those academies are all around rigorous coursework, creating shadow days and internships for our young people, because learning happens at least as much outside the classroom as it does inside the classroom. And then exhibitions and competitions where that knowledge gets to be transferred to something real. But the innovation, I would say, starts in kindergarten, goes all the way through graduation. And it is founded on a principle of students as producers. So what are our kids producing that identifies the knowledge and the understanding that they have developed along the way? And all of that is grounded not only in skill, because we obviously want our young people to be skilled in reading and writing and mathematics and all of that, but it's about critical thinking. It's about problem solving. It is about being good citizens and thinking about the world outside of the world that you personally exist in. Creating curriculum around that and learning opportunities around that. I could go on for 4 hours, but I know you don't want me to.
I would love for you to if we had time. Well, Sherry, I appreciate the focus on the students and their needs, right? And I love how you describe bringing the joy of learning back into the system, both for students and for teachers. And this getting away from this, the high stakes testing is the driver for the focus of the system. So really appreciate it and look forward to hearing more about that today. So Dan, I'm going to ask you now to talk about kind of what were your high points in your success journey? What were some big moves that you made that you felt like were really helping you create a future-focused school district?
Thank you, Karen. It's really interesting because a lot of the things that Sherry said is exactly what I would say. So if I wanted to move it along, I'd simply say ditto, right? But the truth is that really the success that we experience here in Naperville and we've experienced over the past decade or so is really a result of our kids, our families, and our educators. It's that really focus and commitment on the people and understanding that real change comes through relationships. In understanding different needs. I can't right now claim somebody on the moon. I can claim, the youngest person ever to ascend to the summit of Mount Everest is your Lucy Westlake, a recent graduate from Naperville High School, right? And so when I think about driving the change. I'm going to share a line that I steal from my wife, who I have the honor to co-chair the AASA SEL cohort with. And she, in a presentation she gives, she talks about looking at your classroom and seeing those kids and just imagining one of them could someday be the first person on Mars, right? And so you think about as our educators, it's like our kids are demanding different. Our kids want different. Our kids, and now what we've learned the last couple of years, they have options. And if we're not giving them what they need, they're going to go elsewhere, or they're going to want to learn in a different way. So like the Learning 2025 pathway, the demonstration system, the Lighthouse designation came at a perfect time for Naperville 203. This year is our 50th anniversary as a school district, as a unit school district. And we've been in the process since just before the pandemic of really updating our roadmap, and we call it a blueprint, for the work that we need to do to be future driven. We are a school district that is very successful academically, both in terms of performance and growth, highest achieving, highest performing large unit district in the state of Illinois. But when we peel that back a little bit, and I think what drives our success is recognizing that gaps persist and exist within populations of our students that we're not addressing, we have not been addressing. And so we've kind of adapted this mindset of just, if it's not working for one of us, then it's not working for all of us. So we've got to really step back and think differently about how we do. And so for us, our journey really has been from a holistic approach to how we support our kids. As I just indicated, very high-performing school district. We, academically have done some great things. But when we talk to our community, this is another success story, is our community tells us, focus on your mission, focus on your purpose, focus on who you are. Everything else will take care of itself. And so our work really has gone back to about 2012, 2013, through community engagement, where we talk to the community about really how do you define success? What does a successful Naperville 203 graduate look like? And they told us you've really got to focus on that whole child and social emotional learning, which I know kind of has a bad connotation in various places, but in our community, it's what they've told us they want us to focus on, and how we support our kids and how we support the whole student. And so for us, our success really has been driven by I would say that engagement of our community, the involvement of our stakeholders, but a real focus on trying to meet and respond to the needs of every single individual unique learner and providing them multiple opportunities. And then for us, as we think about moving forward and being very future driven, recognizing that in a very high performing school district, where a lot of conversation historically has been about, which four-year university you get to, is recognizing that there are different pathways to a post-secondary success. And we've got to think differently about how we educate and prepare our students to be successful once they leave us.
Yeah, I like that, multiple pathways, and not one size fits all. I really appreciate how much these two school districts and their superintendents, on traditional measures, really high-performing school districts, probably both of them have been. And the fact that you had the courage to go out and say, this is not enough. We need to do more for our children. And I really appreciate both of these superintendents have some really wonderful information on their websites. Sherry, I know you have a lot about students as producers on there, so I would encourage anyone that wants to know more about that. But these kind of change efforts in the context of high-performing school districts requires that you bring your community along with you. So talk with us a little bit now, and I know there was a question also in the Q&A, is, how did you bring your community along? How did you get them on board with these kind of changes and build that kind of momentum that was necessary? Dan, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Sherry.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when we think about challenges, obstacles, and things like that in this work, being very candid here, let's recognize, appreciate, and just name the fact that our educators are exhausted. Our principals, our building leaders are exhausted. And so the sense of there's just so much, and we're being asked to do so much more. And how can you ask me to do more? Just recognizing that we really are driving hard and trying to do amazing things, which is all the right work, and everybody recognizes that. Just this whole sense of a belief that there are just too many things on our plate. We're juggling too many things, too many competing things. So, that's, I think, probably one of the biggest obstacles. And I think another obstacle has historically been the demand to perform at a high level. and that I can't take my foot off the accelerator of my curriculum map, and what's next. And we've had to really talk about, take a step back. It's okay. Build your focus on relationships. Get to know your kids. Get to know who they are. Know them by name. Know them by need. Know them by strength. However you can support your kids. So I think through again, when we think about the challenges and obstacles and how we respond to it, really being intentional about everything. It's all the plate, right? It's not another thing on top of it. It's all the plate. And we think about the wheel around Learning 2025 and just all of those components, and recognizing that in order to be successful, in order to move forward, you have to tend to multiple things. It's not just one thing. It has to be many things. And I love the conversation about high school redesign and Linda talking about advisory. A very deliberate thing that we've done, again, to try to address that relationship building in our two large high schools is incorporated advisory time, an opportunity for self-selection for kids to get the support that they need, either academically or social emotionally, and to really focus on we are being very intentional right now about concentrating about a sense of belonging and ensuring that every student is connected and knows that they belong in our schools, because historically, kids have come into our schools and maybe don't see themselves or feel that this is a place for them. So we really try to intentionally and deliberately focus on that sense of belonging. But again, I reckon our folks are getting pushed hard, and we've got to recognize that and kind of even think about moving at the pace, keeping our kids first and foremost, but recognizing we've got to move at a pace that our educators are cared for and supported in a way that they can be impactful for our kids.
I know that student voice and choice is an important piece of this, and you can't have student voice and choice unless teachers feel like they have, the same, right? So I appreciate your attention on supporting your teachers, who I know across the nation are experiencing a lot of burnout. I really do believe this is the kind of work that they want to be a part of. So Sherry, we're running a little behind, so I'm not going to be able to ask all questions. So I'm going to go to you and ask you about, how did you bring your community along as you began to embark on this journey of transformation?
So before I go to that, I, as president of AASA, I feel like I need to also add to what Ann said, which is superintendents are exhausted. We are like the forgotten few, that have been up like 24/7 for 3 years now, trying to figure things out with little or no guidance. So, I'm not going to pat myself on the back, but I am going to pat on the back the people who have really gotten us through this. And in the face of a lot of negativity, which is, in my opinion, completely undeserved. I would say to you two things. First, just the broader community and really the challenges and obstacles both. Number one, I would say, we intentionally did not name things, right? When you name something, like Dan mentioned SEL, you give people an opportunity to fight against you. So what I would say is, number one, do the work and find success in that work, and then share the successes. And you will find that over time, everybody wants to hear more and know more. And they're not saying, well, when I was in school, it was good enough, and so why isn't it good enough now? Because you've already proven how new could also. And I think also what Dan said, which is kind of a mantra that I've been just really shopping around as much as possible. It's not about better, it's about different. We need to stop banging everybody over the head with, you got to do better, you got to do better, it's not about better, it's about different. And so really pushing the concept of life is not the same, so let's not try and improve upon 1892. Let's try and create new for 2022. I would say to you that a combination of the work that we did with Baldwin 2035 and bringing our community into the conversation, sharing the why, which I think we sometimes miss, right? Why is this important? Why is this meaningful? Why is this relevant now? And giving examples of the why really tends to bring people into the fold. They need to understand why we are having this conversation and why we are doing the things that we're doing, and sharing it as much as possible through traditional methods like newsletters and e-communication. But also, we have a big marquee on a main street that goes through our community. It's up on the marquee. All the good news is up on the marquee. I think, though, that one of the things we have to kind of reckon is that most public school systems have existed for a long time. My oldest building is 110 years old. Now, the older I get, the younger 110 seems, but nevertheless, it's old, right? 110 years old. And so we are faced with a unique position, which is to rebuild from the inside out. If you gave me the opportunity to build new, I start fresh, I pick fresh, I'm good to go. But I am looking at a system that has existed in our community for 110 years. Buildings that are 110 years old. And Linda talked about that as well. And so it's creating and building from the inside out. And the last thing that I want to say is that there are 4 areas that need to come together to make this happen. And that's K-12, and many of us are there. Industry, and industry is talking about the need. But higher ed and policymakers, I find that policy is really my biggest obstacle. Higher ed, the teachers that are coming to us, is a big obstacle. We need to really rethink how policy and teacher education programs promote the work that we're trying to do instead of being an obstacle to the work that we're doing. And so all of the work I know that we've done, all of the sharing with the community that we've done, is in addition to, and Dan talked about this as well, it's in addition to what we are already doing. And that is getting old really quickly. So for us, all of the innovative work at the high school level is happening through the elective program because the required program, because of policy, is just not moving, and it's not changing. So it is possible to do it in the current system. It's a little more exhausting than it should be, but it is possible. Again, it's about different, not better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sometimes policymakers have no idea. So sometimes you have to show them what could be in terms of high school redesign and what should that look like. I really appreciate, too, that you all are not just looking at high schools, although high schools are an important piece of this. You're looking more system-wide, K-12 systems change. And we're finding that in every district we work with, the time and attention, like you described, Sherry, and really having deep and important and meaningful conversations about the why can really be a positive momentum builder for the kind of changes that need to occur. And sometimes can even have an effect on the policy landscape when you have people beyond the school leaders talking about why these things need to change. And I'd like to invite Linda to weigh in here and maybe comment or even ask, because I know the policy question probably sparked your attention, the policy comment. So I'd like to ask you to weigh in if you'd like.
Yeah, happy to. Among my roles, I serve as the president of the State Board of Education in California. So we are always worrying about this policy question. I think that's such a wise point that, you can't expect schools to be changing unless we're also changing policy. There are some, windows of opportunity. I want to just burrow in for 1 second on the curriculum point. And Sherry made the great point about the Committee of 10 from 1892, which handed down a curriculum that many people still feel, beholden to. And it's embedded in a lot of state law and policy in New York. You've got the Regents exams, which is one of the things that I know there's some effort now to try to think about ways to change that. There's a pilot program to look at everything from portfolio-based graduation to, international baccalaureate. But there's a lot of sense that we have to change the way in which we're stuck. And I heard Dan also talk about how the high school teachers feel so beholden to cover that curriculum, to get through that curriculum, So I think that's one place for some really important work. The world we live in now, knowledge is expanding. There was more knowledge created between 1999 and 2003 than in the entire history of the world preceding. Technology knowledge is doubling faster than every year. Kids are going to work with knowledge that hasn't been discovered yet, with technology tools that haven't been invented yet, solving these massive problems that we haven't managed to solve that threaten our very species. We may not have a species in a few decades if we don't have people who are problem solvers, who are able to learn and work collaboratively to resolve conflict, et cetera. There's also the challenge has changed so much, and yet the curriculum is substantially stuck in 1892. So I do think that that's something to be taking on. We are looking at some of these questions in California. I'm going to talk to the San Francisco Unified School District Board tonight, and the big question is, what are we going to do about our high schools? And this question of how do we understand what kids should be learning? One of the things we know is that when kids inquire deeply, when they do project-based learning, it translates into better results on traditional measures, but also much better results on thinking measures and in college. They do better in college. They're better prepared. The advanced placement program I learned in the last 2 weeks, the head of the college board called me up to say, we're going to embed project-based elements in every AP course because we've had such success with that. And that means those are going to count as part of the final score for advanced placement, that kids will be engaged in inquiries rather than just memorizing facts and spitting them back on the test at the end of the year. So there's movement. The Department of Education has begun to invite innovation and assessment. They're figuring out how they themselves can contribute to promoting and supporting that. But we've got a lot of work to do on that. So it's both personalizing, and everyone spoke to the wonderful strategies, advisories, academies that, you know, allow kids to be well known and to be focused with their teachers on work that matters, but also then this rethinking of the curriculum. So I'm just so glad that it came up. I think we've got to push policymakers on this. It's not enough to say we'll have some waivers. You know, you can come and ask us for a waiver. And I'm certainly making the case that we need to be thinking about, you know, there's things, everything from instructional minutes and how they get counted to, you know, things that have to do with the curriculum and the testing system that have to be really reevaluated.
If I can just chime in on that, sorry, Karen, that idea of not just more policy too, or better policy, sometimes less policy. I agreed to serve as an educational consultant with a state senator because he promised me his role would be to ensure that his colleagues do not believe that they are the curriculum directors for our school districts. And I think so that flexibility to really be more open to what we're doing is so critical.
You know, and I would say,
I'm sorry, if I could just add, I think we need to separate holding systems accountable from holding students accountable. I think we've reached the end game on student test scores, holding systems accountable. And if we ever needed a measure for that, with all of the Ivy Leagues pulling out of US News and World Report and sort of protesting against being ranked against one another, I am on that line. It is time to stop pitting school district against school district and ranking us against each other.
Agreed.
The whole business has to be about collaboration to raise everyone's capacity to do this very hard work. Yeah.
I completely agree. I think the policy environment has to be completely reimagined. But at the same time, I would say there's school districts like these two wonderful superintendents and many across the nation who aren't waiting for the policy to change, trying to advocate for policy change at the same time. But then I also do work with folks who say, well, I need the policy to change first. If you wait for some of these changes to occur, we're wasting a lot of critical time. This is a wonderful opportunity to really advance a different vision for education. We're going to finish on this last question, and this is going to be a little bit of a lightning round since we have 4 minutes left, and I wish we'd had hours together. But because this is an opportunity to really lead something different, and for districts and district leaders and folks out there that are listening, what one piece of advice would you have about how to get started? How might you get started in this work?
Okay, I'll start.
Let's go ahead with Sherry, and then I'll go to Linda and then Dan.
Okay, New Yorkers, we talk fast, so one thing can get us like 3 or 4. First of all, I would say you need to have the courage to do this work. If you lack the courage, it's not going to happen. You need to share the why. You need to build on successes. Don't start big, start small, and then success will breed success. Don't name it, just do it. And remember that flexibility is key. Do not continue to go down the path if the path is leading you in the wrong directions. Be brave enough to say, okay, that didn't work, and let's try something new.
And
I
that's a
will
change
plus
we all
one.
need to make, right? Is mistakes are learning opportunities. Yes, Linda.
I will plus one to all of those and add, don't ask permission, beg forgiveness. Just do what you need to do on behalf of the kids. And you have to really, and listen, of course, to what the kids are saying. A lot of people are using surveys of students now to understand whether kids feel that they are getting the supports they need and the environment that supports them. That can be a huge engine because parents and teachers care about what kids are experiencing to say, okay, what are we going to do next year to move the needle in the direction that allows kids to feel challenged and supported, connected and belonging.
And Linda, on that point, our students can be some of our best advocates for the kind of
Yes.
changes that we want to make, can't they? Because as Dan referenced it earlier, our students are demanding something different. They want something different. I think now more than ever since the pandemic. But they can be wonderful advocates. So we need to listen to them a lot more. So Dan, why don't you round this out? What kind of advice would you have for someone wanting to begin this process or engage?
Yeah, I think hopefully this will tie some of the things together. First of all, acknowledge, admit, appreciate, accept, and celebrate that you don't know it all yourself and you haven't solved it as a school system yourself, and there's a lot of work to do. Second, ask your kids. They'll tell you. They'll tell you what's working. They'll tell you what's not working. And then from there, a lot of things, define your goal. What's your why? Why do you need to change? What do you need to change? Make it really simple, make it really easy for people in your school system to follow and be a part of it. And then those that are taking those courageous first steps, support them, nurture them, help them build success to ultimately build that crowd of people who really want to drive forward till you reach that tipping point where systemically we say, you know what, we can take chances, we can make change, and we can be better.
Thank you so much. Linda, thank you so much for, again, just always willing to share, support, lead, teach us. We just appreciate that. Dan and Sherry, congratulations on the great work you've been leading, and thank you so much for your willingness to share. On this last minute that we have, I want to recommend to any school district leader, any educator out there that was inspired by this work. You can learn more and get engaged in this work. Part of the advice that these wonderful leaders suggested is some of this we can go faster when we go together. You're not alone in this work. You can go with others. Consider joining, and I think Jo has a slide that she's going to share now, which is a way for you to engage is through AASA's Learning 2025 Network. You can learn more about that with this information on the QR code in the slide. There will be also a summit that's coming up this next June where you can also come and hear stories and learn from stories of districts all across the country. We go faster when we go together, and you're not alone in this work, and now is the time for this change to happen. And thank you all for your leadership in this. Linda, Sherry, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm so sorry Bill was not able to rejoin with us, but I know on behalf of Bill, the Successful Practices Network, and AASA, thank you, Ed Week, for allowing us this opportunity, and thank you for joining us today.
Great to be with you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.